Welcome to a special episode of Just Giants with Grump and the Cranky Fan. I am the football Grump. With me, as always, is the Cranky Fan, and this episode has nothing to do with the New York Giants.
That may be a blessing in disguise.
So today, for those of you who are Giant football fans and video game players, or if you just like to collect video games, or you're just excited, this is the launch day for the brand new NCAA football game that is releasing on Xbox, PlayStation, all over the place. And it's the first one since 2013. NCAA Football 14 was the last release. And part of the reason that this video game release was even possible was due to changes within the structure of college football through a lawsuit. Because part of the problem was players had sued EA Sports, I believe, directly, for their images and likeness and names being used without any compensation. A settlement was reached, and now you have this game in your hands if you are a diehard who got this on launch day, which I know from following you guys on Twitter that a lot of you were very excited for this game, and I hope that it's everything that you hoped it would be. I have my doubts, but I hope that I hope it's an enjoyable game and you guys are having a blast with it. But nevertheless, it's because of changes to the college football game that this game was even possible. Each player that is in this, which was reportedly 10,000 players, had their name, image, and likeness added to the game at the cost of $600 a pop and a free copy of this game. So when EA reports that on launch day over 10,000 copies were sold, just remember that 10,000 were given away for free to the players in the game itself. But nevertheless, this is something that I've wanted to talk about for a very long time, is the changes to the college football game, because for me, I have a unique take on how I watch college football. It is secondary to the NFL to me. Every mode of football is secondary to the NFL to me. But for my whole lifetime, it was a decently easy process of understanding who the next great NFL player was going to be by watching college football. And I remember specifically as a kid. Now remember, I was born in 1987, so I was only like 10 years old when Peyton Manning was at Tennessee. And the hype around Peyton Manning was massive. So I remember, I never watched a Tennessee game before that, but I was locked into watching Tennessee those couple of years. Cranky is going to tell you all about how he never beat Florida, but that's neither here nor there. Over the years of me transitioning this way I watch college football to analyzing college football players and finding their strengths and weaknesses and which systems they would fit best for, which guys are going to be all media hype and bust out, all of that has changed every single year. But I find myself for the first time worrying about things that I don't have any kind of solution for. For instance, and I really don't want to pick on a particular person, but I'm going to, as an example, but I'm sure he's going to be the first of several that I'm going to have this concerns with, and that is Caleb Williams. Because of the amount of endorsement money he's already received in college, there is, for the first time, a fear that this player may retire early because he's already made an insane amount of money. There is little to no incentive for him to play through a full career at a high contact sport. And Caleb Williams, I'm sure, is a competitor. I'm sure he's incredibly good, that he's going to be in the NFL for quite a number of years, probably Pro Bowls, probably all pros. He's probably a bad example, but I've noticed with these money things that it starts with one and it always balloons. It's always going to take, one Dr. Pepper endorsement to a player that's on the fringe, getting several $1 million as a 19, 20-year-old. I see this cascading into a worse situation. But I want to talk to Cranky Fan about this, and I want him to do the majority of the talking about the way that college football has changed over the years, because I wouldn't say that he's a college football fan first, but he is a much more appreciator of the game and college football atmosphere and culture. And he went to a football school that has a very unique college game day atmosphere to it. It's very much a part of the Southeast where college football reigns very supreme. So I really wanted him to do a lot of the talking. So welcome, Cranky Fan. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your relationship with the college football game? Because I'm going to be mostly clueless about this conversation as we go through.
Thank you, Grum, for inviting me on your show. It's really great to be here tonight. No, I'm just kidding.
How was the
Yeah.
green room? Did you get any good snacks?
Oh, it's fantastic. Yeah, full liquor
Charcuterie
bar.
board. Yes.
Yes, the Grey Poupon was outstanding. Thank you
Yeah,
for
you're welcome.
providing that. Thank you to our many fine sponsors who have yet to pay us.
Yeah,
No, I
Jarlsberg cheddar and Josh wine.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be an interesting conversation because Grump and I, although we are, if you did not know that, we are related, we are cousins, we are different in a lot of ways. First of all, I am what, 15 years older than you?
And less handsome, correct.
Oh, no, that's not true. I'm much more follically enhanced than you are. Much more intelligent, much more wiser. But
You son of a
no,
bitch. You had to bring hair follicles into this.
hey man,
Gloves are off.
don't bring a pea shooter to a gun battle, buddy.
All right, all right.
No, but I mean, we're coming at this particular conversation from completely different perspectives. I am much older than he is, so I've been around the college game a lot more than he has. I lived a college experience where he went to a school in the Northeast that did not have, it was not a football factory. Even though Florida is the Harvard of the South and was just named one of the public Ivies by Forbes magazine, but I'll put that to the side. Um, my relationship with college football, and you said something where you're not sure if I'm a college football fan first. I got to be very honest with everybody. My favorite sport for the last 35 years has been college football. I love the Giants. Obviously, we've been doing this show for years and years. Anybody who knows me knows I'm a Giant fan, but I bleed orange and blue. I am a Florida Gator first. And it is something that it's really interesting that I did not grow up with college football because I was born and raised on Long Island and moved to Florida in high school. So I had an initial background like Rump did, where yeah, college football was on Saturdays. It was something to do before the NFL on Sundays, and oh yeah, I'd watch the bowl games, but I couldn't tell you. Who was leading the SEC in October. I couldn't tell you, who was on track to be in the Rose Bowl until it was time for the bowl games. And I think a lot of people in the Northeast and probably a lot of listeners to the show probably have the same exposure and interest in college football, where that's cool on Saturdays, and if you are a very serious NFL fan or very serious Giant fan, you start to look at who could translate to the next level. But it's the cliches are all true. I mean, college football is much more of a religion down there. And depending on which state is, how serious people are. A state like Florida, that has three major college programs also has, at this point now, one, if not two, of every pro sport. There's three NFL teams, there's two hockey teams, there's two basketball teams. There's two baseball teams. There's MLS soccer in two locations. But a place like Alabama, where there is no pro teams. Sorry, UFL, but there is no pro teams there. You have Alabama and you have Auburn. And the state is that line kind of shifts based on who's better or not better. Bama's been more successful in the last 15 years than Auburn, but roughly 60-40 Bama Auburn, and that is all they care about. That is their religion. They will argue about recruiting battles in February as much as they will about when they play each other in November. So when you experience that, first just living down there, and then when you go live on campus, you know, that's all anybody talks about. You might meet some girl in your calc class and you're like, she's pretty good looking. But when you start talking to her and she's like, hey, I'm a little worried about the left tackle may not play on Saturday. You want to propose to this woman, but something, there's a lot of other ones like that who feel it's just as important. So it's really part of the zygos. It's part of the bloodline of living in a state like Florida or Bama or Georgia or Mississippi or all of all those states. So it's not just the game. You know, game day Saturday is, and Grump has experienced it with me, it is a 14-hour experience. It's getting up early. It's getting your tailgate set up. It's 3 courses of eating. It's 35 courses of drinking. It's watching the 12 o'clock game. It's watching the 3:30 game. It's going to the stadium and watching the game at 7. It's watching the late game, the Pac-12 game, or the WAC or something after. And then it's Sunday, making that transition to NFL. What happened yesterday? Talking about it nonstop. It is serious business. It's an exhausting day. It's a lot of fun.
I'll actually supplement that and go one step further. I think that all you have to do is be an alumni, and that 14-hour day turns into like 24 hours, right? So like it's something that I've experienced not just in Florida when I've gone with you, but like just in the South. Like there is that whole aspect to on Saturdays into Sundays when we're doing like the airport switch, there is like shit talking that happens from Saturday to Sunday, and everyone's got the polo shirt on with their logo on it, and there's a ton of shit talking in the airport. That's part of it. I'm not being hyperbolic when I say that.
If you fly into Atlanta Airport on a Sunday morning and you look around, you will see people wearing all different SEC shirts, ACC. You will see the random like Ohio State because someone has to fly through. And it's really fascinating. And you're right, you will see, a little. I mean, good natured. I've never seen a brawl at Atlanta Airport.
Sorry, but talking shit. I mean, ribbing. It's ribbing.
Yeah. Because usually, emotions have calmed down by the next day, everything. But it is a thing. It is not something you see with NFL crowds. If we're flying to Pittsburgh to see the Steelers or something, it's not the same.
It's not. So that's why I want to say that, because I think that a lot of our audience is probably in this upper area, and if you've never been down there for that, that's what it is every single weekend. That is very much of a part of it. Now, growing up, I mentioned that I turned on Tennessee. It's because there was no draw up here. I mean, there's a lot of people that like Penn State out here because New Jersey has a decent high school football team situation, and all of those players farm out to Penn State or farm out to Ohio State, so there's a lot of Ohio State. I remember BC being like a really big part of my upbringing. Obviously, everybody who's a Notre Dame fan has never even been on campus of Notre Dame. They're all in New Jersey, New York.
We're going to talk about TV in a little bit, but I remember growing up on Long Island in the the mid '80s, where Boston College was on every Saturday as part of. This is pre them joining the ACC, pre them even being in the Big East. They were just on every Saturday. Syracuse was on here every Saturday. Penn State was. But, we're going to talk about what's happened to college football. But the biggest reason I think that fans are so passionate about college football, it's not even necessarily that it was the only game in town. It was, unlike every other sport, the players that were playing on the field representing your school, you have a common bond with because they are student athletes and you were a student or a graduating an alumni of that school. You were the same as them. You both went to school. You both had, a Gator ID card. You both attended class. You may love the Giants. I love the Giants. I am not a Giant. Even though I have season tickets, even though I've been watching for 40 years, some of you may have a tattoo on your arm that's, a Giant one. Some of you, you may be really close with LT, whatever it is, you are not a Giant. If you are an alumni of a school, you are a Gator. You are a Buckeye. You are, a Longhorn. And that connection is special. And it's something that no other sport has, where you actually are what those people are. And we're going to get into how that is changing and part of all the over reason why college football is not what it used to be.
I would say on top of that, there is a culture around college football that is college centric. So what tightens that bond, in my opinion, is that every school seems to have its own little gimmick or thing or series of things, collections of things that the students can take part in. When even if it comes down to, even if it's something as silly as a fight song, it's something that, like, if you question anything that Cranky just said about the difference as a fan, like as a student who became an alumni, who has never been an actual athlete on the team. That connection is far. There are no Giants boosters. Notre Dame gets mountains of money every single year from former alumni that just, they're boosters. You know, there is no such thing for the NFL. There is no one that has so much passion that they will empty their pockets for the team. That does not happen.
Of course. I mean, never mind the fact that we give a lot of money for tickets. As a booster, I give money to the alumni, the athletic association. I also give money for NIL, and we're going to get to that a little later in this conversation. But you're right. It's kind of like tradition is bigger in college than the pros. I mean, yeah, the fight songs seem a little hokey. The wearing, even the colors that colleges wear. NFL uniforms are sleeker. They have modern looking colors. You have, Seattle has got the neon, and the Giants have that, traditional blue. You know, College teams, the Gators are orange and blue. I mean, that's, if you walked around, on a Saturday night in New York City wearing an orange and blue outfit, people are going to be like, who is this weirdo tourist? But, it works in a college thing. You're reckoning back to probably the 4 best years of your life, when you were a college student. So there's always that little throwback emotional bit. You're singing the same fight song that your dad and your grandfather sang. And, it's all part of the total package, where no other sport, I think, has that total package besides just watching my team play on Sunday.
I was going to say it's the closest thing America seems to have to soccer culturally.
Oh, absolutely. In like England, a lot of people have 2 favorite soccer clubs. They have their Premier League team, the big one, who's going to win the Premier League, who's going to go to Champions League. But they also, their other favorite team is the small club from the town they grew up in.
Right.
Your
Wrexhams.
They like Norwich. They like, I don't know, Schmucksburg, whatever town they're from. That's their passion. Like, they root for this team. They'll root for Tottenham. They'll root for Chelsea. They'll root for Man U. But really, when it comes down to brass tacks, if they met an FA Cup, they're rooting for their small club because that's who they are.
They're who they are. Town. Correct. Yeah.
Yes.
All right. So, in order to fully understand, and this is, I'm here learning with the rest of you listeners. In order to fully understand how much the game has changed and in what way it's changed, we have to know how it was. So, college football dates back to the late 1800s. And if you look up the best teams, they were all in New Jersey or the Ivy League for the first start of it. But what I found really fascinating is that really until after the war, World War II, there was this like long time understanding that college football was too difficult to understand who would be the best team in the entire country. So there were a lot of like novelty awards, but there was an understanding that there was no national champion. So before we get into that, I think that's going to end up being an integral part of this conversation.
Let's
but what I'll say is,
yeah.
Well, I mean, we could go back to that, but I would say like the 1950s is when college football that resembles what we know of it, that's really where it kind of comes around. The 40s and 50s, correct?
Yeah, I mean, in the early days, first of all, the sport was outlawed because it was too dangerous. People died on the field. You didn't have helmets and pads. It was basically a modified version of rugby. And, there literally was a gridiron. There were not only just the lines going this way, but there were lines going this way on the field, and people died. And there was legislation to outlaw the sport as we knew it. And also, scoring was a lot different than it was today. Like the original, like in the 1860s, 1870s, scores were like 3-2, 4-1. It's a completely different game. As things like the forward pass came along, and the game kind of morphed into sort of what the game is today, it became more modernized and became safer and all that. But college football was back then, and what it really was up until recent times, was a regional sport at heart. Worrying about who the national champion was not as big of a deal back then as it was, beating your rival, beating the other team in your state, winning your conference. And, these conferences like the SEC, the Big Ten, They've been around since the 20s and 30s. They may have had different names. They've had different iterations of who was in it. Like, for example, Tulane was in the SEC back in the old days before they got thrown out. South Carolina was in the ACC way back when. But they used to crown the national champion before the bowl games back in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. It was bowl games were purely exhibition games. They were created by Chamber of Commerce's in southern states to get people to come down to tour for tourism and vacation around the holidays. They were never thought of as getting the best teams together to decide anything. It was you play a 9-game schedule or a 10-game schedule, and okay, Notre Dame is national champs. Doesn't necessarily mean they were undefeated. It was just purely a vote. And in the history of this world, anytime things go to purely a vote, there's probably going to be some shenanigans going on. So if you look back in some of the things like Bama's got 18 national titles or something silly. Go back and look in the 30s and 40s when they lost 3 games that year or something. So, Notre Dame has their national championships. Again, go back, look at the teams that they played and look at the actual records, what they were. And it was just, and also back then, remember, no TV, no social media. You had radio. Everything is narrative driven. It's stories. It's writers like Grantland Rice. I always reference on this show like we don't have an offensive line. It's like the 7 blocks of granite. That is just a cliche that Grantland Rice wrote about Fordham in the 20s, and all of a sudden that the mythological about it became huge. And they have this offensive line and it's unstoppable. And C. Spurrier, the godfather of Florida football, won a Heisman Trophy in 1966, not because of gaudy stats. Florida didn't even win the SEC, never mind won a national title. He came on to kick a last-second field goal against Auburn, and that became the stuff of legend, and he won a Heisman Trophy based on that narrative of this guy can do everything. Doug Flutie won a Heisman Trophy because of a Hail Mary pass. He was a good quarterback. May not have been the best that year, but he basically won a Heisman Trophy because of a narrative of a play. So college football back in the old days, and what some people say would be the glory days, was much more, they played, but don't take too seriously what you claim to be a national champion or who they claim was a national. It was never decided on the field. We didn't have conference championship games. It was completely arbitrary who you played even in your conference. Never mind who your non-conference games were. So it was just a completely different era where those things weren't deemed as important.
So that's interesting to me because you can see the seeds being sown as far back as then, these quote-unquote glory days, which what era are we really talking about here, 20s, 30s?
I would say, going back from Red Grange played in the early 20s at Illinois up until probably, let's say like the late 60s, early 70s, going through Oklahoma being, through the war when Notre Dame, the Army, Navy were dominant, going into Alabama and Oklahoma in the 60s and going into the early 70s. I would say those were kind of the quote unquote glory years where it was more, again, narrative driven than, stat driven and actual play on the field driven.
So what's interesting to me is that understanding that the bowl games meant nothing more than a fun exhibition at the end of the year, like a banquet game.
Kind of.
Yeah. That was supposed to grow tourism and something for the state. I find it
like Grump.
Well, what I think is interesting is because what that did is it really sowed the seeds for what we were just talking about with the Saturday shit talking. Like, it was so much more important that you beat the teams in your region, your area, because those are the people you're going to see. And, not all that different than high school football, I guess.
Nailed it. You nailed it 100%. It was, it's cool that Texas is going to play Alabama in the 1963 Cotton Bowl, but, I don't have a rivalry with them. I don't hate them. We were playing them. It's a good measure to see how good we might be. But remember also, back then as it is now, college football usually ends around Thanksgiving weekend. Bowl games, and also remember something too, bowl games had more cachet back then because there were only a few. I mean, now it's freaking ridiculous. You can be under 500 and get a waiver and be bowl eligible. It's no big deal to be bowl eligible. Of course, I say that because Florida didn't make a bowl last year, but still, back then when there was only a handful, you had your big ones. You had your rose, orange, sugar, cotton, and then you had a fefew extra ones along the way that were, that started like the Gator Bowl is one of the earlier secondary bowls. It actually meant something to be invited to it, either whether the game itself really mattered that much. So it did have some cachet to be invited, and it's kind of like an all-star game. It's more important to actually be invited to the baseball all-star game than actually what happens in that all-star game.
I get you. And when would you say that started to change? Is that like immediately post Glory Days into the 70s when all the bowls started popping up? Would you say that was the first step?
No, I think, everything always kind of comes down to money. You know, the sport was becoming more and more popular, but again, still on a very, very regional level. You know, very popular. The SEC was very popular, but in the 80s, even up as far as the 80s, the SEC package was on WTBS. It wasn't on CBS. There was no SEC network. There was no ESPN, ABC game. They were on at noon on WTBS, which was a local. I don't know if people remember back when we used to have superstations. It was a local Atlanta channel that Ted Turner owned and made a deal to put it up on satellite so other cable companies can pick up this local channel, and it became a de facto national channel. WTBS in Atlanta, WDN in Chicago, WOR in New York. Later on, WPIX in New York was also the one in Denver, whatever that one was. But that was it catered to a southern market, really. So there wasn't this national outcry for who is really the national champion, and there was no real outcry of it really sucks that the Big Ten and the Pac-10 champs were locked into the Rose Bowl and were never going to play the winner of the SEC for a national championship game. Just wasn't that important back then. I think it really started changing as we kind of get into the 80s and we get into the 90s, where a couple of major things happened, which really, again, money is the the mover of all these things. But there was two major things that happened that kind of turned the sport, from a regional game into more of a national game. The first thing was in 1992, the SEC expanded. They expanded from 10 teams. They picked up South Carolina, which was an independent. I'd said before they were in the ACC. They left the ACC in 1969. Was independent for a long time. They joined the SEC, and Arkansas they poached Arkansas from the old Big Eight, or sorry, the Southwest Conference, and became part of the SEC. And then the SEC split into two divisions and started the first conference championship game. And they realized the amount of money they can generate from having not a bowl game, like a mini Super Bowl. They could charge, they had it, the first couple of games were in Legion Field in Birmingham. Then they moved to the Georgia Dome. They could charge premium prices and get a premium TV deal for this marquee game with pretty much guaranteed marquee teams in it. Georgia, Bama, Florida, Auburn, Tennessee. I mean, occasionally a Mississippi State might sneak in there, but really your blue bloods and your new blue bloods, like Florida was becoming, were in that game, and it had tremendous ratings, tremendous revenue. The second thing, which is even bigger.
Wait, hang on. I just want to pop in there and react to that as a fan, and in the spirit of this conversation, I'm on board so far with that change. I think that change, there is a money element there where people can reap rewards, but you are, I would say, not only keeping the regional thing intact. I'm saying I would think that bolsters it, adding a conference championship game.
Tell that to the people who love Texas, Arkansas. Major rivalry, gone.
The realignment is one thing.
Yeah.
Separately from that, I mean specifically the idea of a conference that now has two divisions and a conference championship game. I'm on board with that
Yeah.
concept right
Well,
there.
that's the thing to me, because like I mentioned earlier, back in the old days, you didn't have a rotation of who you played in your conference. You basically had contracts with different schools. So Florida, Georgia played every year since 1933. Florida, Tennessee, which we think of as a big rivalry, an important rivalry, they only played like maybe 15 times between 1933 and 1990. It was when the divisions became aligned and they had a set schedule of everybody plays each other in their division, and you play a couple of rotators on the other one, where Florida, Tennessee became a game. Now, Florida played Auburn 90 times. When they went to the divisions, that went away, only just when you rotated. So, the going to a conference championship game, it kind of made things a little more tidy, but it also streamlined and made a little more fairer that path to a national championship.
So the other aspect of this first big change here is the idea of shaping the conferences. And you mentioned that Texas Arkansas used to be I didn't know that. Texas Arkansas to me means nothing, but Texas Oklahoma means a whole lot to me. Yeah. Texas Tech means a lot to me. I understand those rivalries.
And that's nothing. Texas A&M was a huge rivalry. I mean, They used to play on Thanksgiving night, massive. Texas A&M goes to the SEC. Texas stays in the Big 12. That rivalry is done. Now, Texas going to the SEC, as we jump way ahead, that will be renewed again. But yeah, rivalries were shattered.
So I guess my question is, again, totally on board with shaping conferences, but as long as you're keeping that region intact. Now, Arkansas is in the Southeast. I don't see a major stretch there. But was there any, in that first realignment there of the SEC, was there any teams added or dropped that were, a little regionally questionable? Or was that really not really a thing yet?
The SEC hasn't, in modern times, the SEC hasn't dropped anybody. They added South Carolina and Arkansas in 92, and I think it was 2011 they added Texas A&M and Missouri, which you can argue,
Missouri is pretty north.
Yeah, Texas A&M, you can kind of make maybe a claim. I mean, they were both Confederate states. They, sort of south. It's a stretch. I've been to Missouri. I've been to Columbia, Missouri. That ain't the South. I don't know what the hell that place is. It's not the South. They have no bloodlines to any of the other SEC schools. It's just a place where white people live. It's really nothing. I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't know what to tell you about what Columbia, Missouri is.
I've never been, so I'm just going to take your word for it.
It's about halfway between St. Louis and Kansas City on I-70. You just go straight as a board down the road for an hour and a half. You pass a Waffle House, and then there's the exit, and there's the stadium. That's basically it.
Okay, so as far as the SEC is concerned, it sounded like they waited until very recent times, in my opinion, 2011. Or whatever you said, to get a little questionable with their conference alignment, but I'm sure that other conferences, I'm almost positive without having to look it up, other conferences made really bold moves.
Yeah, but you also have to realize something too. Cultural fit is pretty much the last thing that these conferences are worried about. They are worried about.
I'm aware of that, but my point is as the game changed. You mentioned this realignment here of the SEC as being the first big change to the game. I'm cool with you mentioned the Texas Arkansas rivalry was shattered, but that is the one sacrificial lamb that also brought us conference championship which in my opinion bolsters that regional spirit of the game, what makes college football very special.
Yep.
And you've shaped out this conference in a way where you didn't pick only the most premier teams in the country. You stayed in your region. By adding Arkansas and South Carolina, which are very much in the Southeast and very much a part of that culturally. Everything there, while that may not have been the aim, it's still bolstered what made college football special, in my opinion, right?
Initially it was. We're going to talk about the absurdity of conference expansion in this last wave of it. where you have a conference literally called the Atlantic Coast Conference, and you have Cranky Wife's Cal Berkeley part
Oh,
of that
well,
new
I mean,
conference.
so the whole purpose of this conversation is that I would say in the last 5 years, the college game has radically shifted. Like,
Oh yeah, but
just like put in a spin cycle and launched out the top of your dryer.
but I need to get to the second thing that happened
Go
in
for
the
it. Yeah, yeah.
in the 80s, which is far more important actually than conference realignment, the growth of conference championship games. It was up until 1984, the NCAA was the sole negotiator with TV networks over TV
Mm.
rights and TV payment. Something called the College Football Association, the CFA, was established, and it was kind of like what the Premier League did in England. Is the top conferences, the top teams decided, hey, wait a minute, we deserve more money than this system now where everything is spread equally. And before 1984, there were rules that said you were on national TV one time per year during the regular season. You can be on regional broadcasts, but nationally once a year. Think about that. Can you think about a we live in a ESPN. On the ESPN app, you get every single SEC game. Basically, any college team you want is available at your fingertips. Can you imagine back then that Notre Dame was on nationally once?
Yeah, that's pretty wild to think
It's
about.
crazy. So they wanted to negotiate, I think it was with NBC, their own contract, and the NCAA blocked it. Again, all of these moves of college football is control over money. So University of Georgia and Oklahoma University sued the NCAA claiming antitrust violation. And instead of the NCAA settling, they went to court, they lost. So as a result, the CFA was able to negotiate the rights for individual schools as opposed to NCAA as a collective. That changed everything. That gave the power to the schools. And then when the CFA kind of faded away in the early 2000s, the conferences took over from the individual schools, and the conferences got the power. So as soon as the conferences were able to negotiate, because they realized, collective bargaining, it's easier to negotiate as a group as opposed to individual entities, and they didn't want to be lumped in all together with the NCAA. Like Alabama didn't want to have to share money with Washington State, but sharing it within the conference is more palatable because more of the money's coming in there. So that fundamental shift to the conferences controlling TV money changed everything. It changed where the money came and where the money went. Huge. And to this day, we have the repercussions of that power shift to conferences. And that's kind of impacting where things are happening now.
So, in what way is that bad?
Well, you have two mega conferences now who have, teams that have, quote unquote, unlimited budgets for recruiting, hiring coaches, TV exposure, you name it. Florida State is trying desperately to get out of the ACC because their media rights deal with them is very prohibitive. They will never make the revenue that a school in the SEC or the Big Ten will ever make.
Okay, I see
And
now.
they're a major school. I mean, they have an 80,000 seat stadium. They are very popular. They are a national brand, but they will never generate that money. Doesn't matter if they get 150,000 people in that piece of shit stadium. They will never get those media that money, that the deal that the SEC has with ABC, ESPN.
Now, pardon my ignorance here. Would
Yes.
that potentially, broaden your mind to a 50-year scope into the future?
Mhm.
Those media deals, would they potentially shift with let's just say, a hot shot coach? Well, let's just say, an NFL coach goes to college and does extremely well there, and let's say he's at the University of Miami, and then another NFL coach goes to Clemson, and another NFL coach goes to Wake Forest, and now the ACC has three really good teams for several years in a row, and it's challenging the SEC for, I guess for lack of a better term, eyeballs on TV, because those are now three of the more premier teams are in the ACC. I picked some really wacky ones, but neither here nor there. Now, can that money situation shift in the balance towards the ACC?
I mean, theoretically, I mean,
Okay.
the problem is that you are dealing the footprint of the SEC. Their schools have much bigger footprints, they're much bigger alumni bases, a much bigger success, a much
Well, you're
bigger
fighting uphill to do
brands.
this. Yeah.
Exactly. I
Well,
mean,
it's like everything else in the free market. Yes,
yeah,
theoretically, the free market can correct itself over time,
but
but it takes so goddamn forever, and then the powers that be can block so many
right.
maneuvers. Right, right.
I mean, they just have it's an arms race with SEC schools or has the better practice facility and football building, and they pay more for coaches. They, you've walked around campus with me. You've seen, these buildings. And it's like I got a tour of the locker room at Florida last year, and my God, that place it's insane for 18 to 21-year-old college kids to. It's nicer than the one that's at MetLife for the Giants. It's crazy.
Yeah, it really is. I've seen walkthrough tours of several college. I
Yeah.
have not been to a single college football locker room. I'll say that, but I've seen several like tours, like video tours through there, and it's nuts, dude. It's like a theme park. Like some of them
Yeah.
with the lighting in it and everything. It's
Oh,
crazy.
it's just as much done to attract recruits to want to come to your school as it really is for the current team to get ready to practice and to play games. It really is. It's how can I wow you with this experience that you have to commit to this school? It's all presentation. It's all theater.
So let's um let's get back onto the timeline here. So
Hmm.
we're in the early '90s for the
Hmm.
CFA lawsuit, or late '80s.
It's actually was just the 40th anniversary was last week of the, so 1984.
Okay.
So in the 80s you had the CFA. If you watch the game on ABC Sports, it'd be like ABC Sports presents CFA college football, where
Hmm.
Miami is playing Notre Dame, for example.
Gotcha.
There was no CFA, like there is the NCAA, but there was no CFA. It wasn't a conference. It wasn't a group of schools playing in something. It was just that was the name of
The Power Five.
well, not even that. It was just kind of like schools that banded together to get a better TV contract. That's it. There was no CFA champion. There was no MVP or Heisman Trophy winner of the CFA. It was just that was the umbrella under what this TV arrangement was.
This is so interesting. Having only been born in the '80s, I missed out on what must have been a tumultuous time. You have the CFA agreement changing college football as we know it forever. You have the USFL losing an antitrust lawsuit with the NFL, or winning
Hmm.
it on a
They
settlement
won
of
it,
$1,
right?
and also NFL free agency in the late '80s,
Yeah. Oh, the
late
bigger
'80s,
thing
early
too was
'90s, I think.
we had,
Late '80s.
we had the strike in '87 for
Oh,
football, where
yeah.
people, the Giants won the Super Bowl in January of '87, and that fall you had scabs playing at Giant Stadium.
Hmm.
You only played, I don't know how many games the regular players played, not many, but yeah, huge,
So
huge change.
back in this timeline now, what's the next? What was the next shoe to drop? Was there another conference realignment,
Well,
or
the next shoe really to drop was once we kind of figured out where the money was going to be controlled by, where the money's going. Then they really started to think about how do we really, the next jewel in these TV contracts would be, how do we get to a real national champion? Like, how do we determine this thing? And you got to remember, back in the day, from the 30s up until, relatively recently, conference champions had agreements with bowl games where the conference champ was going to contractually obligated to go to this bowl game. The SEC went to the Sugar Bowl. The Big Eight, which became the Big 12, went to at the time, the Orange Bowl. Then they went to uh, where the hell did they go after that?
Cotton?
The Cotton Bowl. The Southwest Conference, which merged into the Big 12, that used to go to the Cotton Bowl. Pac-10, big Pac-8, which became the Pac-10, became the Pac-12, went to the Rose Bowl. So when you have these contractual agreements, that's where they're going. There's never going to be a playoff where
I see.
after the like
You never have conference champions playing each other.
Very rarely, because there always was in the Sugar Bowl an at-large team. So that's why you would see Bama play Miami for a national championship. That's why the Orange Bowl, Miami was always in the Orange Bowl because they were independent back then. And hey, they drew well in South Florida. So, if they get Oklahoma down there, it'd be Oklahoma, Miami. That's the famous Nebraska game when in 84, when they were undefeated, one of the best teams of all time, lost to Miami. That was Miami's first national champion. That was one of the biggest upsets of all time. Miami got to go there because they were an independent and they would draw.
That's Howard Schnellenberger, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So how did that? So what was the first national championship like? How?
So it kind of morphed over time into different things. First, there was the Bowl Coalition from 1992 to 1994, where the goal for this was not a playoff, not a championship game, but this game was going to be the national championship game. So it was basically taking, if you didn't have the Big Ten and the SEC champion 1-2, they were trying to align the at-large pick to go, the highest ranked one to go to where the highest seeded conference champion went. So, for example, Florida might have been, these are hypotheticals, was number one and they won the SEC, and Miami was number 3 seeded and they were independent. So rather than going to the Orange Bowl, they would send them to the Sugar Bowl to play for national champion. Now, there's obviously flaws in this. Obviously, if you had two number 1 versus number 2 that were contractually obligated to a bowl game, they're still playing in their bowl games. So this merged and morphed into the Bowl Alliance in 96, 97, where you had a little more flexibility of who's going where, but the only problem was the Rose Bowl, again, was not part of this agreement. So Florida won their national championship in 96. They won the SEC. They went to the Sugar Bowl. Florida State was number 3. They were the ACC champ, but instead of going to, I don't even think the ACC even went to a contractual one. They went to the Sugar Bowl and rematched Florida. When Florida and Florida State rematched, that was not a 1 versus 2. That was a 1 versus 3, because number 2 at the time was Ohio State, and they lost to Arizona State in the Rose Bowl. They were both contractually obligated to play in the Rose Bowl. So it's getting better, but you're not there yet because the Rose Bowl was very stubborn. Rose Bowl had its own contract with NBC at the time. It was, the granddaddy of them all, always had the best ratings of every bowl game. They were number 1. So they didn't want to upset their apple cart.
Interesting.
Then you get to the BCS.
And so which to you, before you get into how the BCS worked and whatever, was this not the most bullshit one? Because it's the one that makes the most sense, but I think it was entirely reliant on votes. And I remember, you get like 4 undefeated teams, and it was like, how the hell did they get number 1 and 2?
All of this up to this point was all about votes. We're going to get to the BCS now, the Bowl Championship Series. 2 things happened here. One, they decided on a 1 versus 2 game, with the exception of the Rose Bowl. No, including with the Rose Bowl now, they picked 1 versus 2 regardless of what bowl you were in. So if it was USC playing Florida State, they now had a 1 versus 2 game. They rotated where that BCS championship game, as it was called, was played. It could be in the Rose Bowl this year, the Orange Bowl next year, the Cotton Bowl the year after. But what they did for the first time was they came up with something called like the BCS. They had a formula, which was partially votes. Like they take the AP, the coaches poll and the writers poll. They'd have a computer come up with part of it. So you had this not just subjective vote for who went to it. It was supposedly more objective because you had the computers and strength of schedule and things factoring all this into this soup, and it's the computers spit out, these are the top 25 teams. This is 1 versus 2.
And that was from 1998 until the college football playoff.
This is up until 2013 when we had the college football playoff, which became a 4-team playoff after the bowl games.
So your perspective is that this obsession with finding the national champion is A, not in the spirit of college football, and B, solely a search for money.
Well, it is and it isn't. I mean, okay. It is a goal of college football, but unlike every other sport, it is not
the primary goal.
The goal. And the only thing you can compare this to is like soccer in Europe, where winning the Premier League is a goal, an important goal, but it's not the only thing. You can be in Champions League. You can win the FA Cup. You can win the League Cup. You can do all these other things. So if you don't win the Premier League, your season is not a bust. You might have won Champions League. So college football always was about, winning your conference, beating your rivals, beating teams that you hate, putting yourself in position to win a national championship. Schools that play in crappy conferences that are dominating, like how, Florida State was in the ACC in the 90s, where they were clearly men among boys. It kind of became national championship or bust because they didn't have many rivals. They didn't even have conference championship banners in their stadium up until recently when they stopped winning them. And they were like, oh, we need something to decorate our crappy stadium with. So so
you don't have a massive problem with these with this situation here. Like you think it contributed to the overall problem that with where we are now, but at the time was not really a big issue for you?
The playoff and the national championship, to me, relative to the other problems with college football, are small potatoes.
Okay, I would agree with that.
I always was in favor of a playoff. Even from before there was a playoff, I always thought there should be an 18 playoff. At the time, there were 6. There was a Power 6 conferences. I always thought the 6 conference champs and 2 at-larges, because every game in college football matters. Mm-hmm. And you think that's like, that's not true.
No, it's true.
Lose to Samford, season's over. You're not playing in the national championship game. So, but being perfect is very, very hard. And you may be the best team in the country, and you had to go into Auburn on a Saturday night in front of 80,000 people, and you lost by 3. So I always thought there should be a second chance. I also thought if you had a team like a BYU or a Utah or a UCF, and if you're 12-0 or 11-0 and you think you're shit, all right, fine. Prove it. Prove it on the field. I'll give you an opportunity. I think the 12-team playoff they have now is a reach. Not that there won't be good games, but I am much more sympathetic to the 5th who lost out in a 14 playoff, or the 9th in an 8-team, than I am the 13th in a 12-team.
I'm with you so far. So when did the current state of college football come about then? If it's not the bowl games and it's not the championships, then where did we really go wrong here? Is it the transfer portal? I certainly think that contributed.
I think the 2 biggest things, in my opinion,
and this is all from 2000s and on, correct?
Right. The 2 biggest things I think are, and we'll go through them both. The first one is the transfer portal, the easy ability to move from one school to another without any consequence. And I also think this ESPN nationalifying the game. So kind of making it all about being in the national championship or bust. and doing what ESPN does, how they ruin every other sport, where they're all about 2 or 3 storylines that matter over everything else. And college football is not about storylines, like individual things. You know, ESPN yesterday had on their front page 7 stories about Bronny James because that is the narrative they are pushing. They think that's what give it the best ratings. And what they do at college football is they've taken away that localization, those rivalries, the conferences, and it's all about from January to September, who are the favorites to win the national championship? What are they combine that with gambling? Who's the odds to win it the most? Who's going to win the Heisman? Let's talk about that all year. Not even worrying about, hey, Texas is playing Oklahoma this week in the Red River Shootout. No. Texas's chances of winning the national championship now are 96% or whatever. They look at it as just national championship or bust. That's perception wise, but the biggest problem for me, and it's not NIL, it's the portal. What I said before, how you identify with your team because those guys are Gators. I'm a Gator. They were recruited. They spent 3, 4, 5 years on the team. They left. They'll be identified with being a Gator for the rest of their lives. Not the case anymore. Since they kind of made it so you can get a waiver, it used to be if you want, you always could transfer. The rule was always in effect, but you always had to sit out a year. And that was kind of your punishment for making. And they changed the rules and said, you can just transfer. You're allowed one transfer, a free one, like a get out of jail free card. And there are some legitimate reasons why players should transfer.
I understand where you're going with the issue behind it, and that it fundamentally destroys the core of what makes college football great. It's as if if to use the soccer analogy, if you could just change your birth certificate and say you weren't from that shitty town that soccer team has never won shit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You change your identification, and not that if you think that this doesn't matter to the players, I think that you're wrong. Like you see like the social media things behind the, I don't know. You see Evan Ingram and Joe Judge giving each other shit over Mississippi State and Ole Miss, right? Evan Ingram went to Ole Miss. Yeah.
Right.
So, they had their own little thing where, I think it was Joe Judge had to wear Ole Miss gear for like a whole day as like their little wager. This shit does matter to them. So, like, when you have somebody come up that played at 3 different schools before he makes it to the NFL and had nothing to do with moving up from a lower division, they just...
Didn't Evan Ingram start at Oklahoma?
I have no idea. I used the first example I could think of.
Yeah. So, I mean, even that now is kind of like, well, that's where you ended up. I mean...
But, you see players interact all the time where they're like, oh, get your USC ass out of here kind of thing. Like, it's very much a part of the players as well.
Of course. Yeah. But the problem is, like, you can't relate. Just look at college basketball. College basketball, college basketball is not nearly as popular as it was 25 years ago, is because the best players are one and done. The second best players go somewhere else. They very rarely stay at a school for more than a couple of years. So every single year, it's like you go to that first scrimmage. Who the hell is this team? You lose that kind of connection of familiarity of knowing who your team is.
Okay, so the first part of the thing is I know where you're going with why this is ruining what makes college football special, but my question to you is, why should a kid not be able to transfer? So I know that there's rules around it, so I want you to kind of explain the whole thing to me here, if you can.
I mean, that's it, right? I mean, this is all about we're looking at it from a fan. I'm looking at it from a fan perspective only. Selfish Gator Mike says, I want to get the best recruits. I want them to stay for 4 years. I don't want them to leave early to go to the NFL when they could be a number 1 draft pick. I want them to stay in Florida as long as they can to help us win 4 national championships while he's there. Not reality. Football is played by athletes, and athletes now are empowered. The way the rules are, they can now get paid. They can now have the portability to go wherever they want. So they're not looking at it as I'm going to this school to get a good education to play under this coach to win games. They are looking, the majority of athletes today, and you could tell me I'm wrong, but prove it to me, are looking at three main things. How much NIL money can I get in the very beginning? How fast can I get on the field to play? How fast can I get to the NFL?
So
That's what they care about.
I don't want to dilute this conversation quite yet into the coupling of NIL with the transfer portal, because I think that's really the crux of the transfer portal's problem, probably. But again, I'm the uneducated one here. But before we dilute that conversation with the NIL stuff, I understand a lot of different things with wanting to transfer that are strictly football, right? Like, aside from wanting to move closer to home, maybe this wasn't such a good idea going to this school on the other side of the country. Maybe you have a medical emergency within your family and you would like to be closer to your family. I'm not even talking about any of that shit.
That happens.
Let's just say, Bear Bryant came to my house and recruited me, and I went to where Bear Bryant is because I wanted to learn from Bear Bryant. Now Bear Bryant just got fired. And now I'm stuck at this fucking school?
Or any coach. I mean...
Yeah, I mean, obviously. I picked a legendary one.
In theory, you hear these recruits say the same bullshit all the time during the recruitment process. Coach X is like a father figure to me. This place feels like home. I have a connection with this staff. So, yeah, I could see that.
And that makes sense to me, especially if, let's just take the example that you don't have to be a quarterback, but for the most egregious example, you're a specific style of quarterback. Now the guy who recruited you is gone. New guy runs a West Coast system that you can't do. That's not what your game is. This is no longer the best training scenario for you to hone your skills for the next level.
See, here's the difference between college football with the NIL and the NFL is that, yes, college kids are getting paid now, but because of the way the law is and the way NIL is, the schools are not paying them. There is no contract.
That's correct.
You do not have a 4-year deal to play at the University of Florida getting paid $5 million a year. You are paid by a third party to, quote unquote, promote your name, image, and likeness. It's that whole part is a complete farce and nonsense. I am fundamentally in favor of NIL and players getting paid. They always should have been paid. It's nonsense to even think that this is amateur athletics. Players have been paid under the table since, the birth of Christ. It's always been a part of the game. It's been that shadowy thing. It's
been a punishable thing, though, in the past.
Well, that's the thing.
SMU didn't even have a football program for a while.
If you want to punish. Alabama has been cheating for years. Georgia has been cheating for years. Don't believe me? Look at pictures of the parking lot outside Sanford Stadium 10 years ago and tell me that these poor fucks from whatever backwater shit-kicking town in Georgia all of a sudden are driving, SUVs and fancy cars. It always has happened. It's where do they want to crack down on? And maybe they have a certain respect for a coach, a program, who knows? But I fundamentally do not have a problem with NIL.
Right.
I have a problem, the fact is that now that you're getting paid, but you still don't have this tie to it, you can go wherever you want. In the NFL, if Brian Dable gets fired tomorrow and they bring a new coach in who decides to run a completely different offense, tough shit, quarterback. That's, you're stuck with it. You have a contract, you're getting paid, you be professional. These guys are kind of professionals now. And so the fight or flight thing is like everybody just, I'm going to another opportunity. But there's really no repercussion for that happening. So,
one other thing that I noticed now shifting to me less as a clueless fan and more as I watch college football for the players entering the NFL because I want to know as much about them and what they can do as possible. I look at specific players that maybe transfer away from Alabama because they're good players, but they'll never get playing time on a team like that. And therefore, there will never be any film. So they transfer out of there. And I think about that kind of stuff. I'm like, that makes sense to me. I get that.
Joe Burrow went to LSU because he was not going to start at Ohio State.
Correct. Where I think the problem I have is that players are transferring, in my opinion, good players on perhaps maybe not a good team. Or remember, with the regular built-in roster rotation of college football, may have been on a great team for the first 3 years of their tenure in college, but a bunch of guys graduated and they didn't recruit very well to follow it up. So now they're the best player on a shit team. Instead of facing that adversity and letting iron sharpen iron, I'm seeing players leave and go to where it's just easier. Does that make sense? I mean, I don't want to say that is the motivation, because I've never met a single one of these people. I've never spoken to any of them.
Are you talking about players that were playing somewhere and then decided to go somewhere else to play again, or just guys who never started?
Guys. No, I'm talking about guys that were playing somewhere, and rather than be the good player that lifts up a team, they leave that team and just go to an Alabama or an Ohio State, or just some program that's already stacked, almost like it's free agency, where it's like that school is trying to win a national championship that year, so they bring in this senior or something like that.
I think the biggest myth going is that winning trumps all in college. I think these guys, I'm afraid of this as these kids get older and they start getting more into the NFL, and that's it. They care about themselves. They care about their brand. They care about their bank. They care about their image.
And I certainly think that their exposure is definitely part of the equation.
I really don't think people are moving around based on that gives me the best chance to win.
Well, maybe that's not it, but I think from my perspective, I think that being stuck at that school, for lack of a better term, or having the punishment of having to sit out a year and therefore in your final year make transferring worthless, that built-in thing, it allows, adversity is what makes us all better at what we do, no matter what it is. Having to deal with constraints and restrictions.
But you got to remember something about these guys. From the second they picked up a ball, they have had their asses kissed.
Sure, that's not my point. That's neither here nor there.
No. It is the point, because when you have your ass kissed in junior high, high school, college, surround yourself with yes men who tell you you're the greatest thing since sliced bread. You have never faced adversity in your life. And if you've never faced it before, you're probably going to be adverse to it and like, fuck this. I don't need this. I'm better than this. I'm just moving on. So I could see why, not many people look themselves in the mirror, especially at 19. Maybe when you're 34, 35, and it's like you have one more shot in the NFL, take a good look in the mirror and say, okay, I'm not the guy I used to be. I know I want one more shot. These guys still think they're Superman. They have had their nuts stroked for.
But no matter the motivation, the fact that there used to be restrictions on the transfer portal forced those scenarios. So they couldn't just get up and leave. You're a senior at this point, so leaving means you'd have to sit out your senior year.
It was just different too. I mean, that's where you went. It was never part of the consciousness of like, I'm going to leave and go somewhere. It very rarely happened. It just wasn't something that, even with the year away, coach left, you stayed. You didn't start, you stayed. Maybe some guys did, but the percentage was, even applying for waivers was low. It's just, I committed to this school. I'm going to this school. And that was that. So yeah. It's a different mindset now of, oh, I can leave. That's an option. It will always be at the front of my mind.
Just from my perspective as somebody who watches these kids over time, I'm noticing, I don't know. I think that in the past, having to be stuck in those scenarios made them better players, made them probably better people as well, because, commitment and whatnot, well, learning the value of commitment and so on.
Remember, too, that, not as many people left early back, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Some people might have left after their, for their senior year, but most people hung around. Everybody back then didn't bail out of a bowl game because they're about to get ready for the combine or some nonsense. You played. You did your time. You were there. It's just it's again, the ability to be portable And again, thinking about your brand, I mean, these athletes, what they do now, this cycle, if you guys don't know what this is like, it's when they're getting into recruiting, they'll make an announcement to say who their final 12 teams are. Then they'll make an announcement to say, these are my final 4. Then they'll make an announcement to say they're making an announcement. Then they'll make their announcement. Then they'll say, I'm 100% committed, but I'm looking around. Then they'll make an announcement confirming their announcement. Then they will finally sign somewhere. And then the next year, I'm transferring, and start this cycle all over again. It's craving that attention because that attention builds their brand. It builds followers. It builds their profile. Wins and losses are not as important to the player as it was back then, because it's all about them and all about this world we live in, where they are now stars of their own reality show. And that reality show, the climax of that show is not necessarily winning a game or winning a national championship. It's being there, being out there.
I find that very interesting because you're 100% correct. I know that. I've seen that. You're far more in the recruiting cycle than I'll ever be, but I constantly see all kinds of videos, and over the years I've seen it happen where, and the silly hat fake thing.
It's the most disrespectful thing there is, and it's so cliche. It's, if you're saying I'm trying to decide between 2 schools and both of these coaches are like a father figure to me, having your announcement, pulling that hat thing is so disrespectful and so obnoxious. You're not original. You're not funny. You're a little bitch if you do it. It's one of the things that it is so, it aggravates you so much because you're the 97th person who did it. You're not funny. You're not fresh. You are just an immature baby, and probably for the best interests of my school that you're not here.
Yeah, I've seen it time and time again, and then after all that hoopla, they just move on to another school anyway, potentially
Exactly.
one that wasn't even in the running in the past. So I've seen all of that. That's certainly, I guess, annoying. But I guess from your perspective, you know, I understand, right? Like, the more you crave that attention. So, like, you're a great player. Everyone knows you're a great player, but there's tons of great players in college football. It's difficult to decide who the best is at any position every single year. I know because I'm part of that conversation. And I understand the more that you're in the news, the more your name is mentioned, then the more likely that's going to transfer into money down the line. And I get all that.
Or not even money down the line. I mean, Bronny James is going to make a ton in NIL because he is a public figure right now because of the publicity around him. The gymnast at LSU is going to make more money in NIL now because she is a celebrity. It's not down the line. It's in this world now with NIL. It's now.
So,
Hawk to a girl in a week. It has 1 million followers on Instagram, is going to make a ton of money. It happens that fast.
I literally might be the only person that didn't find that even remotely funny. But
it's not even a question of funny or not. It's just how fast these things happen. Hey, look, 2007, or 2008, I caught a home run ball at Fenway Park, and I was always wondering if this would have happened during the social media age. How many followers that I've gotten from that? Because I was on the news. People knew who I was during the World Series and all that, and it goes away. Not saying it was anything, but I'm interested in how that could have been converted to likes, follows, endorsements. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, really, you could have launched the podcast right then. A baseball podcast.
I 100% would have.
Could have been your whole life course just changed right there.
Exactly.
So I follow all that, but what's interesting to me is that I find no player so good at playing football that I must tune in to watch that player. Like, for me, I look at, and again, I understand that I'm a wacko here, but like, I want to see, like, if there's a great edge rusher or something like that, I'm not really interested in watching the great edge rusher from Ohio State just pummel Akron to the ground. I'm interested in the one game where Ohio State has to play Michigan because, this is going to be a challenge for him. This is the closest thing to what an NFL game is going to be like for him. And so, all of this, I get it that they're doing it down, that it's not down the line. They get the money right away if they've pulled all the shenanigans, but it doesn't make me want to watch you anymore. It doesn't make you any better at the game of football, and it doesn't do anything.
Unfortunately, you're in the minority because
Yeah, I know that.
what school last year had the highest ratings of any school on TV ratings?
I don't know. I would guess it was Michigan.
Nope. Colorado, who won
Oh,
four
that makes
games.
sense. Yeah.
And why were they? Because Deion Sanders is a personality. Deion Sanders, changed the face of what a modern college football team it presents itself, how he handles press conferences. That early season buzz was nothing like I've ever seen in college football, where it's like,
Well, it was so weird
they're not
because
that good.
I think the buzz came from the buzz itself. Like the media generated the whole story.
Sure.
Is can he do it at the Pac-12? Like I wasn't all that interested in that. I don't know if he can do it. Being a college football coach is like a 3-year ordeal to get the team that you want there. You can
Yep.
kind of scrap together some shit in a year, and
But
that's sort of what he did.
what brings monster ratings and brings monster likes and follows and all of that related stuff is the casuals. People that would never watch a Colorado football game.
Well, that's what it is.
Yeah.
A TV is not seeking to please the people it knows it already has. We've talked about this before when we talked about the fucking Sunday Night Football intro song or whatever.
And ESPN, I think its ultimate detriment, has done the opposite. It actively pisses off the people that care the most. They are trying to grab every little piece of the pie at the expense of the people that made the sport what it was originally. And that's my biggest problem with ESPN when I talk about the nationalization of the sport. They are so busy trying to get the fan who lives in what town do you live in New Jersey? You live in northern New Jersey, to get those people to watch at the expense of the people who watch in Columbus, Georgia, or Live Oak, Florida, or any southern town.
I even from my perspective, they pissed me off with their never-ending search for a dollar. When they cut away from college football to side-by-side screen and then switch the audio over to Aaron Judge at the plate. A completely different sport. I understand, but hey, that game is on TV. I can switch the channel anytime I want.
That's a unique situation. That was a historic moment in sports. I get. What bothers me is that you will, for a month, talk about a game that's like a playoff game. If you watch I don't know, let's say a bowl game on December 15th, like whatever bowl game, who cares? How many times will you see either on the scroll or coming up next, or don't forget, January 1st is the college football playoff? 100 times during that one broadcast, until you get to that playoff game, and then all they'll talk about is the championship game. That's all ESPN. All ESPN is in the what is next, and they do it in a way that just makes people insane. It's all about them, and that has been my biggest gripe with them. It's all about them, it's not about the game itself. It's not about the people playing. It's about them. They make up bullshit stats like projected win probability. That's nonsense. Show me that percent. How do you come up with that?
That is the most nonsense horse shit ever.
Right, but it's a stat that they use. ESPN. It's like, and then people are like, well, they were 87%. I'm like, don't rattle off things.
Are you seriously referencing that nonsense? Like,
yeah, exactly.
All right, so let's dive into the full NIL talk here. So, How does it work? And is it a disaster? And go on from there.
In theory, NIL is great. I think that these guys, two things. One, these guys should be getting paid. They are playing a very dangerous sport at the highest level of their age group. The only people better in the world, better than what they are people in the NFL. There is so much money that is splashing around in college football. The people that are playing should be participating in that money grab for it. So I am glad that they are finally getting paid. I am glad also that we are taking away a large chunk of the shadiness of college football because these guys are getting paid before anyway. And like we mentioned earlier, some people got caught, some people they looked the other way, and it's not a level playing field. Um, there has to be, but the problem right now with NIL is it is the Wild West. NIL money does not come from the schools in the majority of states. I think California might, but in places like Florida, the University of Florida is not paying the athletes. It has to go through a collective, or it has to go through a booster, or it has to go somewhere, which presents a whole bunch of problems. One, the university, the coach, the athletic association, the football program, in theory, is not control of their roster. I mean, they can huddle up with these guys and say, I really want him. But at the end of the day, it's the deals that are being made between boosters, collectives, and the players themselves. So it's basically how much money can these collectives raise? So what's their budget? It's not the budget of the athletic association or the university. It's, and even so much like, Nick Saban, best coach of my lifetime, his recruiting prowess is still kind of predicated on how much money the collectives of Alabama can raise and can make a deal. So I think at the end of it will sort out over time. I think they will standardize and national, like how NIL gets distributed. The money will come from the schools to there, but then you're also opening up other cans of worms because Title IX says if you have to pay everybody, and if you start paying football players, then you have to start paying everyone for every sport, male and female. You have to pay them the same amount. I don't know. So they're trying as hard as they can not to have, and also they want to keep their gross margins up from all these TV deals. If they have to start paying, why should they pay for it now when the collectors are paying for it? So these things will be sorted. We're only in year 3 of this. I think there'll be some lawsuits, there'll be some court cases, there'll be some laws changed, there will be some NCAA or whatever the successor to the NCAA ultimately will be. But I think we will come to a place where it's standardized and it will be a net positive over a net negative.
Yeah, I so let's kind of encapsulate one other thing here, and that is in the last 3 years, major conference realignments, and this has to do with that TV money that you were talking about. So the Pac-12 completely dissolved down to 2 teams, I
Uh,
believe.
yeah,
Oregon
Oregon State
State
and
and
Washington
Wazoo,
State
right?
technically are the Pac-12. They technically have the TV contract still. They technically have the Rose Bowl bid, but there's really nothing around it. So I'm sure it'll be, negotiated out how that's actually going to fall out. But the Pac-12 right now is really the Pac-2.
So, and that all had to do with TV deals, correct? Can you walk everyone through that because it was very confusing. I know you've told me before, and I've already forgotten. So,
Yeah, basically, schools had the option to, you know, for example, USC and UCLA saw that the Pac-12 couldn't get it. They were working on a deal, but the amount that they were projecting that they would make would be far less than if they joined the Big Ten, for example. So they just exercised their right to get out of the Pac-12 and join the Big Ten. The Big Ten. Big Ten would love to have them. That having 2 schools in Los Angeles, the second biggest market, a market unlike New York or Chicago. Well, Chicago, I won't say Chicago. Unlike New York, actually cares about college football and people watch. Huge for that. They don't mind splitting up the pie 2 extra slices if they know the pie is going to be bigger at the end of the day.
right.
Now, the difference between them and Florida State is the ACC is like, fuck you. You can't leave. Florida State would love to leave the ACC and join the Big Ten, the SEC, the Big 12 even, because they know they'd make more money. But the ACC, is absolutely no way are they going to let them out of it. They'll probably there's lawsuits starting up now. They'll probably negotiate something out, but no, they're not going to let them go because the ACC will effectively die if Florida State, and Clemson leave. I don't care about their pedigree in basketball. I don't care about North Carolina, Duke, NC State in basketball. Football is the money generator, and with the two major schools leave that conference is dead. It will become like the Big East in like a basketball only conference, but it will make a fraction of the money that it did.
And nothing probably ruined the regional aspect of this sport more than California teams joining a conference with Rutgers. You know what I mean? Like there's there's nothing less regional than that.
Yeah, but I mean the groundwork has been set by that already.
Sure, the groundwork was set, but this is the the climax. This is the death of the regional aspect of the sport when the Pacific entire conference is dissolved and now they've been distributed to whoever will hand them the most money. Exactly. This is the CFA lawsuit coming to its full, its final form here.
I mean, the SEC now has Oklahoma and it has Texas. The Big Ten now has USC and UCLA. The ACC now has Cal and Stanford. I mean, it's but we also live in a world where we don't take stagecoaches across the country. I mean,
well, I understand that, but you and I are people that have traveled a little bit. Mm-hmm. You far more than me, but these places are very different. And the more you travel, you realize that some people just don't have a clue about anything far away.
But something? This country is getting more and more homogenized by the day. I mean,
You can argue whether or not this is a good or a bad thing.
Right. Like 30, 40 years ago, it felt different. When we used to drive from New York to Florida on vacation, it felt different. Like we're in a different place.
Sure.
Now, you close your eyes and you put a blindfold on, you take the blindfold off and you say, okay, what interstate exit am I at right now? What state am I in? You can be anywhere. Yeah. There's an Exxon, there's a McDonald's, there's a Wendy's, there's a Subway, there's a Pickwick, it's the exact same everywhere. People's accents around this country are not, the dialects are slowly morphing into one thing. I mean, that's because we're global now. Everybody listens to the same people on TV and, social medias make this a smaller world. You're not independent all of each other. And, there used to be different styles of football in the different conferences, not just, regional rivalries, but like, the Big 12 used to play more of a wide open offense. The SEC before Steve Spurrier was ground and pound. Same with the Big 10. Now football's kind of, standard. There's not that much of a regional difference. It may be outliers like, oh, this school does something different. Tennessee might be much more of a fast pace, but there's no like, oh, can Southern schools compete with Midwest schools? I mean, that's not a thing anymore.
I mean, I don't know. The Big 12 was kind of known as not playing any defense and just air raiding the shit out of things.
Yeah, but if you're watching a game, it's not like this. It's not like watching a southpaw boxer fighting a righty or something complete, or MMA like a grappler facing a boxer. And that's kind of how it was, 40 years ago. Yeah.
All right. So, one little thing I want to say on NIL. I agree with you 100% in terms of in theory and the spirit of NIL and paying college athletes. I'm on board with. For all the reasons you said, but one additional reason that you didn't say, and that is the farce that these guys are students. And I don't want to generalize because that's not true. There are certainly very, very intelligent student athletes that are excellent in the classroom and on the field. I would say the vast majority of them are not that, and they have been recruited and moved through school for football reasons only. No. This is important because the argument from the side that says they're athlete, they're in school, like they got a scholarship. That's the rewards. They're not even going to class. And the classes that they do go to are horse shit. So they should be paid.
That's pre-NIL though. I mean, Bob Huggins.
But
Bob
that's
Huggins
what I'm saying. That's my
had a 0% graduation rate for 15 years. I mean, that's
my justification for paying them because that is why they're there. This is their training for the next step. They've been training their whole lives to play football professionally. This is what they're doing. I have no problem with them making that money.
I've even thrown it a step further that far more people who play college football will get paid playing college football than will ever get paid playing the NFL.
Absolutely.
I mean, the percentage of people that get drafted is very low. The percentage of people that actually sign a contract is even lower. The percentage of people who play in the league are even smaller than
getting
that.
drafted doesn't even guarantee you a roster spot. You get drafted in the fifth round, you may not make the 53 or ever play.
And then the percentage of people who actually make enough money to change their lives, to live, and have to work ever again is even smaller than that. So you're actually giving more financial opportunity to a bigger percentage of the population than it was before.
I agree. And I would say that, you're at least putting the onus on that person to save those nickels that they get in college, just in case the NFL thing doesn't work out. You've got money where you can, I don't know, go back to school or something. Go to a trade school, anything, so that you are not, the 28-year-old holding up a CVS because you've got no life skills and no contract or whatever. And again, not trying to be a douche, but
that goes back to my argument before. These guys have been told from day one that they're infallible and they're never gonna. I don't want to generalize, but most people are just like, I'm just gonna piss that money away.
Sure,
and
but at least then that's their choice. They're not forced into the scenario of just hoping for a contract when they've already done so much. So I'm going to end this with one final question for you, and that is, how much better or worse is college football now, in your opinion? Now, this year we haven't gotten to see the dissolution of the Pac-12 and how that's played out just yet. That hasn't happened yet. Well, a season hasn't happened since that happened. So what would you say the state of college football? Is it better? Is it worse? And by how much? And are you hopeful for the future? Like, do you think it will right the ship?
I'm going to give this answer not as a fan of Florida, so don't kind of like, oh, they suck. So that's your answer. This is as a college football fan. I think it is far worse, and we're not going back to the way it ever was. I think there was something very special and very unique about college football that will never be replicated. And if you try to replicate it, it will seem phony and fake. They have made their decisions that, conferences and schools are trying to maximize profit. They have decided that. And they want to compete with the NFL as far as being a legitimate sports league where they are trying to make as much money as possible. The things that I think that have made that could have made college football better, like a playoff, have been overshadowed by, again, the unlimited transfer portal, having Cal playing Rutgers or playing Florida State or something, games that if you're even a Cal fan, you don't care about these other teams that are in there. Maybe over 20, 30 years you might, but I don't know. It's, to me, you're making it very generic, and you're making it into on the field a worse version than the NFL, and you're taking away that special sauce that made it unique and made it special. And I don't think that's ever coming back.
I think I agree with you. And it's a real shame because I hadn't thought of it, but you made the point, and I think you might be right, is that like any actual attempt to bring back the charm of college football will seem fake and phony. And so what they've done is they've taken something that was more or less organic, and they've cheapened it. Mm-hmm. What they've made I don't even have a good analogy for it. I think at one point when we were discussing doing this episode, I think I had an excellent analogy when I texted you. I don't have it anymore. It's gone.
They replaced, in every little small town like Bob's Burger, and they've replaced it with a McDonald's in every town. And that's what college football has kind of become.
And every McDonald's looks the same, smells the same, has the same menu, same prices, Same shit.
It's comforting. The masses like it more, and that's what college football wants. College football, the powers that be, mainly the networks, mainly the sponsors, but also the schools and the conferences too, they want mass appeal.
Well, I mean,
They
all
don't
you have
want
to do is cheapen something for one generation, and then you've changed the landscape and the expectations. Once a whole generation grows up with a cheapened version of it, that's what they know and enjoy.
Yeah, I mean, you go to a game in Gainesville now, and 90% of the sounds that you hear are piped in music. Where, and when I was a student, again, a long time ago, but let's even go back. Let's go back to 2010. The vast majority was sounds you heard from the band. And now, you take away a lot of these places that, oh, you can't play that song anymore. That's offensive to some group or whatever. You're even taking away even more of the traditions that were never meant to be offensive, but that's gone too. And so you're getting this, every fucking team plays Sandstorm now. every school plays White Stripes now. Every school where 30, 40 years ago, you heard at Florida State, you heard the Seminole Chop. You heard Jaws at a Florida game. You heard, the theme to 2001 at South Carolina. You heard these different things that were unique to that place. And now everybody wants to have their moment to do that. So it's ruined it. It's made it. There may be more mass appeal. There may be better ratings now. The more casuals out there, but it's never going to be the same. And it's unfortunate.
I'm not really hopeful. I think from an entertainment perspective, if you're watching on TV, I think it's easy to say that the game has gotten better. I think, just to experience on TV, the coverage is better, the announcers are better, they're more familiar with the players. You as a viewer are more familiar with the players than you ever used to be. That is without a doubt in my mind. The camera angles, the amount of glitz and glamour behind it.
It's the same production values as the NFL.
Absolutely.
But something I will say though, I think the game, the product on the field, I think is better.
Well, we'll see how that transitions, though, because part of this, I use the video game as the sort of catalyst for this, but it wasn't the only catalyst to make me want to do this. Major coaches leaving college football because they can't deal with everything that we're talking about. Nick Saban, Chip Kelly. This is the guy from Boston College whose name I forget, was a very promising coach. He stepped down as a head coach. Can't deal with the transfer portal and recruitment and NIL anymore. It is too much management. It's an entirely separate job from being a head coach.
My guess what's going to happen is you're going to see a role similar to a general manager in colleges where roster building and roster management, roster retention is not handled by, and again, I know what I said before that the collectives are actually paying the players, but I think you're going to, I think once this all kind of gets all under the umbrella where schools are paying players and all that, I think you're going to see a very similar structure to the NFL where there's going to be a general manager whose responsibility is to get the players and make sure the roster is set and the coaches go back to coaching. Because you're right, there's going to be a brain drain, especially the current crop of coaches. Now, there'll be another generation of coaches who have grown up under this and know how to handle that. And I think that things will change too. But these old salts, the Nick Sabans, the guys that have been in their 60s and getting up there in age, they're, Chip Kelly's. It's a different game now. And
I mean, yes and no. You know what I mean? Like, I understand that. Look, I'm not going to be like a purist that says like, there can never be new coaches that are going to be great. That would be very silly. Obviously, coaches continue. People grow. Who would have thought that what's his face in Miami with the Dolphins, as a ball boy, was going to grow up to be an offensive mastermind that was putting up 70 points in a game. I'm obviously not saying that, but we are fundamentally worse off without Nick Saban as a coach coaching this upcoming year. And I don't know that I can be convinced otherwise. Like, these coaches could still coach and chose to leave.
Well, I don't know. I mean, to me, You as a casual college football fan, do you prefer when one team just completely dominates?
Well, I mean, that's not my point. He is an excellent coach, and now he's
Right.
not coaching. That's a
Right.
problem. I understand that there's
Well,
recruitment things that go on with that.
He's 70-something years old too. I
Sure,
mean,
Chip Kelly's not 70 though.
Chip Kelly's not young.
He's not young, but he's not ancient. You know,
And also Chip Kelly kind of sucked at UCLA too.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean,
I would agree with that.
Nobody's shedding any tears that he's not coaching. He could say what he wants to save face, but the fact is, he was a big disappointment at UCLA.
Absolutely, especially for the money he got. But nevertheless, he is an excellent coach, and I think that there is going to be a dip that happens because of this. You know, to me, the most egregious is the guy whose name I can't remember at Boston College, because he was such an up and comer. People were very excited about him, and then he just
the bigger one is
sure.
Peterson at Washington. I mean, he was he brought them to the playoff, and he just said he was burnt out, and that was the end of it.
And I think that all of this has to do with everything that we said. You know, these coaches leaving. And that is a problem, and it's going to trickle towards the NFL. And this is the other thing for people who are like, I don't really care because I do just watch on TV. Well, I do think that the players get a short end of this. They get money, but they lose out on other things, and that will trickle upwards to the NFL because that's just how shit goes downstream.
Yeah, everything's also cyclical too. You know,
sure.
And also
I do think it can be fixed. But the history of the NCAA and college football has not given me any hope that it will be.
If I look into my we'll end this with crystal ball prediction.
Yeah.
I think in the next 10 years, you're going to see maybe not even either the top conferences like the SEC and the Big Ten, or specific universities break away from the NCAA and start their own thing like the Premier League, where they get all the money, they share the money, kind of like the NFL, roughly equally, and they are just not affiliated with the rest of Division One. So if you like the Vanderbilts of the world will not participate in this Super League, and I think with more equal distribution of money, I think you'll see less and less of transfers across from school to school. I think you'll see more.
Without a doubt.
You'll see more roster kind of, and I think that's where college football is ultimately going to be headed, because, you can try all you want to increase market share, but when you're just cloning the NFL and people realize this is not as good as the NFL, and you lose what made it special, you're going to lose the casuals. They're going to spend their time on Sunday and not worry about Saturday.
Yeah.
So I think there's just too much money, and I just think greed is always there, and I just think that the greediest are going to want to keep all the money for themselves, and they're going to form their own thing.
Yeah, and I you said the equal distribution of money is kind of the solution. That'll never happen. I understand what you're saying. If they break away, then they will have that one influx of money that they can then distribute equally amongst themselves. Those that break away.
That's what I mean. That's exactly just like what the Premier League did. Like the top 20 teams were like, fuck it, we're starting our own thing. We're not sharing with the rest of the FA. We're taking it, and this is us, and we're gonna, remember that's TV money we're talking about, because
right.
Individual schools, because based on fundraising, based on how they gate and all that stuff, they'll make more or less than others, but like the NFL model works, and the NFL model is the reason why the NFL is the most popular sport, because
sure.
it allows for everybody to be equally financially solid. You haven't had a team. You have very, 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 very few teams move. You have no teams that just go out of business. It's a very stable sport, and a lot of it's because there's financial certainty because everybody shares in it. And I think that's why it's been more successful than other sports.
Yeah, absolutely. Cranky, I want to thank you for doing this extra episode with me. I could not have done this or covered this topic without you.
Yeah.
If there is a clamoring for more
off-topic shows.
Well, I wouldn't want to say off-topic, but Cranky Fan college football perspectives, I would love to do more stuff with you.
Oh, sure. I mean, I could talk about anything. I could, this happens to be a passion of mine, college football. I know it bleeds over into this show quite a bit. My Gator bias and my just opinions about stuff, but this was the perfect time to kind of set the stage of where we are with this sport and where's it going to go, because they have a chance to still save themselves. I just don't think it's going to happen anytime soon.
No, yeah. I mean, this is Jack on the piece of wood floating in the Atlantic Ocean with plenty of or Rose on the wood with plenty of room for Jack, and just not letting him on, because that's not going to happen. But maybe this year, because of the college football playoff is the first time it's going to be 12 teams. I'll get your perspective before the 12 are announced and then after, and if it lines up with what you always have a very, very poignant and good take, and you tell it to me in confidence, and then we end up talking about it after the fact on the show, and it sounds like we made it all up.
Yeah, we'll definitely talk about the key points in the college football season as we get to because there's the other changes also, like we kind of touched on it, like there's no more divisions in the SEC, or that means now it's just the two best teams. And what happens when and not everybody doesn't play each other. It's not round robin. It's not the Premier League. It's not like in your division in football, in the NFL, where how are we determining these teams? Are we going back to an arbitrary, the highest ranked playoffs ranking? Well, then all of a sudden now we're getting into shenanigans and stuff. So how are we getting to those 12, or how are we getting to a conference championship? Going back to the way it used to be, and I didn't like that at all. I'm afraid about that too.
Interesting. So we'll definitely do that. I want to thank you all for listening this long, and we'll see you guys on the next Just Giants. Until then, go Giants.
Go Giants.